Today we are going to be working on video filter number 2. If you want to get the project files for these, head on over to my Patreon where you can subscribe for just $1 and get all these project files. Alright, let's get started. So first you got to set up your scene. We're going to delete this light, delete the default cube, select the camera, hit Alt-R, Alt-G, GZ6. Place the camera up above a little bit, head over to the World Properties tab, change the color all the way down. Select the camera, go to the Camera Data tab, change the type from Perspective to Orthographic, set the size to 2. Hit 0 on the numpad to enter the camera view, Shift A and add a plane, scale it down on the Y-axis until it fits within the camera bounds. Press Ctrl A and scale to apply the scale. And we're going to set the end frame to 240. Alright, now head over to the Shading tab. I like to close up these windows so that I can see a little better. Hit numpad 0 to enter the camera view. And click on New to create a new material. We're going to use a bunch of textures and combine them into the emission on the principled BSDF. I'm using Blender 4, so if yours looks a little different, don't worry, you can still do this tutorial. If you're in Blender 4, make sure you open up the emission shader and set the strength to 1. Now make sure you're viewing it in the rendered mode. First thing we'll add is a noise texture. Set the scale to 50. And hit Ctrl T to add a mapping and texture coordinates node. Then add a color ramp. Take the factor of the noise texture and put it into the color ramp. Now take the color from the color ramp into the color of the emission shader. For the left color stop, change the position to 0.764. Change the position on the right color stop to 0.864. Now let's go ahead and add in another noise texture. Set the scale to 1.91, the detail to 2.98, the roughness to 1, and the distortion to 3.94. Press Ctrl T to add another mapping and texture coordinate. Add in another color ramp. And link the factor into the factor of the color ramp. Change the left color stop to 0.645. And the right color stop to 0.705. Then add a math node. Change it to divide. Put the color from the color ramp into the top value. Change the bottom value to 50. Then Control-Shift, right-click, and drag those two, the color ramp and the math node together. Change it from Mix to Add, and increase the factor to 1. Then we're going to add another noise texture. Set the scale to 3. Set the detail to 5.6, set the roughness to 0.442, and press Ctrl T to add another mapping and texture coordinate. Add another color ramp. Hook the factors together. Make the left color stop 0.26. Make the right color stop 0.432. Now add in a wave texture. Set the scale to 29.78. Add a texture coordinates and mapping node. Change the Z rotation to 90. The X scale to 0.9. The Y scale to 0.03. Change the distortion to 18.75. And the detail to 15. Then add in another color ramp. Add the color to the factor. Change the left color stop to 0.875. Now Control, Shift, right click and drag these two color ramps together. Change it from Mix to Darken. Move the top line up to the factor and the bottom line up to the slot for A. Change the color in slot B all the way down. Then add a math node. Change it from Add to Divide. Plug the result into the top value, change the bottom value to 35. Then Control Shift, right click and drag this mix color onto the divide. Switch it from Mix to Add, turn the factor all the way up. Next, let's come down here and add in another wave texture. Set the scale to 22. Press Ctrl T, add in a texture coordinates and mapping node. Change the X scale to 0.43. Add in another color ramp. Set the left color stop to 0.954. And the right color stop to 0.955. And make sure you hook the color into the factor. Now add a Voronoi texture. Change the scale to 6.3. And bring the randomness all the way down. Then press Ctrl T. Change the X scale on the mapping node to negative 2.94. Change the Y scale to 0.05. Then add in another color ramp. Change the left color stop to 0.655. And put the distance into the factor. Now combine these two color ramps with Control Shift right click and drag. Change it from Mix to Multiply. And turn the factor all the way up. Now add another math node. Put the result into the top value, change it from Add to Divide, change the bottom value to 16. Now Control Shift and right click to combine our math node with the last Mix RGB. Change it to Add, and increase the factor all the way. Next, we're going to add another Voronoi texture. Change it from 3D to 4D. Change the type to Chebyshev. You can leave all the settings as they are. Just press Ctrl T to add a mapping and texture coordinate node. Change the Z rotation to 90. The Y scale to 3.72. And the Z scale to 0.16. Then add another color ramp. Hook the distance into the factor. Change the left color stop to 0.673. The right color stop to 0.795. Then add another math node. Put the color into the top value. Change the bottom value to 30. Change the type from Add to Divide. Now Control Shift and right click and drag the Mix RGB onto the math node. Change the type to add and increase the factor all the way. Now let's go ahead and add another Voronoi texture. Also change this one to 4D and Chebyshev. Change the scale to 10. Hit Control T and add another mapping node. Change the X rotation to 331. The Z rotation to 90. Change the Y scale to 3.72 and the Z scale to 0.16. Then go ahead and add another color ramp and hook the distance into the factor. Change the left color stop to 0.773 and the right color stop to 0.782. Now bring in another math node, set it to divide, put the color into the top value, change the bottom value to 10. Then let's go ahead and combine this math node with the Mix RGB with Control Shift, right click and drag. Change the type to add and increase the factor all the way. Next, let's go ahead and add in another wave texture. Leave all the settings as they are, just hit Control T to add another mapping node. Change the Z rotation to 90. Change the Y scale to 4.76 and add in another color ramp. Hook the color into the factor. Change the left color stop to 0.823. Now let's add in another wave texture. Change the scale of this one to 0.4. Make the distortion 6.6 and the detail 6.3. Press Control T, add in another mapping node. Change the Z rotation to 90. Change the Y scale to 3.59. Add in another color ramp. Hook the color into the factor. Change the right color stop to 0.041. Now combine these two color ramps by pressing Control Shift, right clicking and dragging them together. Change the type from Mix to Subtract and increase the factor all the way. Now add another math node. Put the result into the top value, change the type to divide, and change the bottom value to 4. Now combine this math node with the last Mix RGB by pressing Control, Shift, right clicking and dragging them together. Change the type on this one from Mix to Lighten. Then change the factor to 0.133. Now all that's left for us to do is animate our texture. Bring your mouse to the bottom left corner of the screen until you see the crosshairs appear. Then click and drag upwards so you can add in another window. Change this window type from shader to timeline. Now let's go from top to bottom, adding in our automation. Scroll up to the very top of the node group. Click on the first mapping node. Hover over the location section and press I to insert a keyframe. Press Shift and the right arrow to move to the end of the timeline. Change the X location to 13.3. Then press I to add a keyframe. You can see this is starting to add a little bit of movement. We're going to repeat this process for the rest of the mapping nodes. Scroll down to the next mapping node. Make sure you select it by left-clicking on it. Hover over the rotation this time and press I. Make sure that you're starting from the very first frame. Then press Shift right arrow to move to the end of the timeline. Change the X rotation to -239 and press I. Press Shift and the left arrow to move back to the start of the timeline. Select the next mapping node. Press I while hovering over the rotation. Shift and right arrow to move to the end of the timeline. Change the X rotation to -239. Press I to insert the keyframe. Now move down to the next mapping node. Press Shift and the left arrow to move back to the start of the timeline. On the first frame, press I to insert another keyframe. Then hit Shift and the right arrow. Change the Y rotation to 49.9. And press I again. Then move down to the next mapping node and select it. Press Shift and the left arrow to move back to the start of the timeline. Hover over the location and press I again. Then hit Shift and the right arrow. Change the X location to -1662. And press I to insert another keyframe. Then move down to the next mapping node and select it. Press Shift and the left arrow to move back to the start of the timeline. Press I and insert a keyframe for the location and the rotation. Jump to the end of the timeline with Shift right arrow. Change the Y location to 1.66. Hit I to insert the keyframe. Change the Y rotation to 79.8. And hit I to insert the keyframe. Now let's move down to the next mapping node. Press Shift and the left arrow, jump to the start of the timeline, press I and insert a keyframe for the rotation. Also insert a keyframe for the Voronoi texture next to it for the W. Jump to the end of the timeline with Shift right arrow. Change the W to 1.994 and insert that as a keyframe. Change the rotation on the X for the mapping node to 120 and insert that as a keyframe. Now let's jump down to the next mapping node and select it. Press Shift left arrow to move back to the start of the timeline. Insert a keyframe for the location. Jump to the end of the timeline. Change the Z location to 6.65 and insert a keyframe. Now we're going to jump down to the very last mapping node at the bottom, skipping the one in between. Select it. Jump back to the start of the timeline with Shift left arrow and insert keyframes for the location and the rotation. Jump to the end of the timeline with Shift right arrow. Change the X location to -3.32. Press I to insert a keyframe. Change the X rotation to 59.8 and insert that as a keyframe. You can always feel free to adjust these settings to your own taste. One last thing to do is fix the keyframe interpolation type. Select each mapping node and hover over the timeline and press T. Change the interpolation type to linear. Scroll your way back up and make sure that you do this for each node with keyframes. Now we should have something looking a bit like this. I hope this was helpful for you. Please help me out by leaving a like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.